Passion Harvest. Hello, passionate listeners and watchers. Welcome to Passion Harvest. I am Louisa, your host, International Passion Ambassador. Thank you so much for being here right now with us, wherever you are in the world. If you like this episode, please do subscribe. I have a very exciting guest today, and I can't wait to find out more about her incredible journey and her experience. Her name is Paula Lenz. In 1983, Paula had a recurring dream which proved to be a precognitive warning. In the same year, she lost her brother, Don. 3 days after his funeral, Paula had an out-of-body experience with her brother's spirit while she was driving. The result was, as she described, a visit to infinity and a change in her consciousness. Paula continues to experience occurrences and connections with her brother, Don. Paula hopes her story will provide comfort to those who have experienced the loss of someone they love deeply. Paula is a native Texan, holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from San Houston State University, and is the author of Driving into Infinity, Living with My Brother's Spirit. Paula's extensive business career of more than 40 years includes executive director for a major Houston association, as well as co-founder and owner of a national community relations company. This is her story and this is her passion. Paula, welcome to Passion Harvest, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm thrilled.
It's an absolute pleasure. And we were just discussing briefly before we started this interview that for me, today is the day that your brother Don died, which is kind of incredible. October 7. Actually, a friend of mine called me last night and said, "Oh my gosh, I just watched an interview. You won't believe it. It's actually the same day." Synchronicities, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so it is 37 years ago now since his passing.
Wonderful. So I would love to start with your dreams that you discuss or experience that were potentially warnings of the future.
Yes, I like to give people a sense of exactly when this was because the year that I had this precognitive dream, or that it started, was the year 1982. And, back then there wasn't an internet at that time. And that was a time before we had personal cell phones, and computers were really not the norm, like in offices. And I was 29 years old at the time when I began to have this recurring dream. And this dream was always the same. I was out on some fields and hills, and people were gathering there. And soon there was a big crowd. And someone came up to me and asked me what was going on. And when they asked me that, I replied that I had heard it was the end of the world. And when I said that, then suddenly everyone was looking up in the sky, and there appeared Jesus. And in that moment when that happened, I just doubled over, almost down to the ground. And I was experiencing the worst agony and pain I had ever known in my life. But it was not physical pain. It was heartfelt suffering and agony. And I just kept saying in the dream, but it isn't supposed to be this way. I thought that the end of the world was supposed to be joyous. And then the dream would end. And I would always be startled awake by that. And I had no idea what this dream meant. But I continued to have that into the year 1983. So we fast forward now to, it was a Friday, October 7th, 1983. And that morning I was driving my husband to work. I was going to drop him off, and I was going on downtown in Houston to the Greek festival. And later my husband was going to join me there. But as I was driving him to drop him off at work, I suddenly got this really deep pain over my heart area. And I was thinking to myself, what is happening? And I was quite fearful because I wondered if I was having a heart attack or what. But I didn't say anything to my husband. I just dropped him off and I drove on down to the festival, and the pain went away. And I thought, oh, well, it was probably nothing. So later, then at the Greek festival, the group of friends I was with, we were getting ready to go inside for lunch. And there were already huge crowds of people that had gathered there. Most of the event is outdoors, but obviously for the lunch, we went inside. And as I had said, my husband was supposed to join me there later in the afternoon. But in the middle of these huge crowds, we're trying to get lunch and everything, I spotted him across the room making his way toward me. And I thought, well, he's here a lot earlier than we talked about, but I thought, well, that's good. But as he progressed toward me through the crowd and got close to me, I saw his face, and I had never seen him look like that before. And as he came up to me, he looked me right in the eyes, and he put both of his hands on each of my arms, and he looked me right in the eyes, and he said, Donnie was killed this morning in an accident. And I just crumpled down to the floor. I was just screaming. My friends rushed over. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Now, my brother, Don, is 4 years younger than me. I have a sister who's 10 years younger. But my brother and I grew up together, and I was always looking out for him. And so I felt almost responsible. It's like, why wasn't I there to stop this from happening? Which, of course, I knew was a ridiculous thing because he was grown, he was 26, and, there would have been nothing that I could have done. But it was just sort of my sisterly instinct, I'll say, to react that way. And the thing of it is, I was told after that my brother's accident, the time of his death, he was killed at 9 a.m. that morning. And that is exactly the time, as I was driving my husband to drop him off at work, that is exactly the time I had this pain over my heart area at the exact time of his accident and his passing. So then later on, I realized that this recurring dream that I had been having was showing me the circumstances under which I was going to find out about his death, because a lot of it was outdoors. It was at this Greek Orthodox church, hence kind of the religion deal with Jesus in the sky, and then all these crowds of people. So that's why I had that recurring dream, although I had no idea that that's, what it was about. And, for me, the grief, and I described this in my book, but, the grief for me was just completely unbearable. I mean, of course it was for our whole family, but again, because my brother and I grew up together, I just, I was still very close to my brother, and we would still get together, and we talked on the phone, every other week or whatever. And I just didn't know how to deal with that. And
people talk a lot about grief, whether they've lost someone very close to them or a child as well. And I get a lot of people contacting me. They just don't know how to move forward. They just say it's all consuming. They want to potentially die themselves to reconnect, if possible, with the loved ones. But what would be before we continue the story, because it's so important, and I know how much you are doing this to give back to others, what is your advice to move through that grief?
Well, my first comment is, I just didn't know a human being could cry so many tears. And you just, in the beginning, there are just no good ways to deal with it. I think you just have to go through the emotional reactions and feel what you're going to feel in your heart, and just let that come through, because if you don't, I think that in the long term you will have, many more issues and problems about it. So, people want to come up to you and comfort you.
Mm.
And, they have a lot of good words that they say to you. But I was so deep into my grief. It was, in fact, I describe it in the book, even like at the funeral, it was like looking at people and friends that I know really well. It was as though I was looking down this tunnel at them. It just seemed like these people were just so far away from me, and I was just in this cave of grief. And I just don't know that there's any way else to deal with it in the beginning. Now, later on, it was just, I think it would have been good, given the suddenness of my brother's passing just out of the blue. It probably would have been helpful to have gone to a counselor, some grief counselor, and be able to talk it out with someone who's trained in that area. But I never did that, and no one really suggested that to me. But in looking back, I think it could have at least provided some kind of sense of the floor beneath my feet, instead of just feeling as though I were hanging out in space with just nothing under me. And and it was hard to talk within our family about it, because everybody was just dealing with so much of their own sorrow.
Mm. Well, thank you for sharing that. Please continue on this story.
Well, so I stayed on at my dad and his wife's house the week following the funeral. My mom and her husband at the time, they lived elsewhere, but I just wanted to be part of writing these thank you cards to all these people. I mean, we just had so many people at the funeral. He was well liked. And so I decided to stay in my hometown of Bryan and, help write thank you cards. And I took, what I wanted to do was the Wednesday after his funeral, his funeral had been on Sunday. So that Wednesday, I decided to take some of these funeral flowers out to my grandparents. And they lived just a little ways outside of town. It was about 15 minutes. And my husband, in the meantime, had gone back to Houston. And the only access to a car at that time I had was my brother's personal truck, because he was killed in a company truck. And so I loaded up some of the flowers. I started out driving by myself to my grandparents' house. And about halfway there, I'm driving along, and suddenly I could see 360 degrees around me. I could see everything around me as I'm driving down the road. And I'm thinking to myself, what is happening to me? But before I even really had time to think very much about that, at that moment then I became aware of my brother at my right shoulder as I'm driving. I'm still seeing 360 degrees around me.
Did you feel
And
him?
my brother
You felt your brother?
Pardon me?
You felt your brother?
Yes, I saw him. He looked like a pattern of lights to me.
Was he in his physical appearance as he was in this life?
Yes, I mean, he still had the physical appearance, his face and everything. I knew it was him. But again, he was made up of this pattern of lights. But he was right at my right shoulder. And he began to speak to me telepathically. I could hear him in my mind. And he said, I don't want you to be sad. He said, I'm happy And most of all, I want for you to know what it's like for me now. He said, I am on another plane of being. And he said, it just had simply been time for him to go. And so at this point, then I became aware that I was no longer driving. I was no longer in the truck. Instead, I was with my brother, and I was focused entirely on realizing that I was out in the middle of the universe with him. And I knew that this was infinity and eternity. I was feeling this all the way through me. And I felt during this whole time that I was completely one with the whole universe. Now, my brother stayed with me through this whole experience. He was there. But at first, I felt this wave of, I'll say, all peace that came over me. And then the second wave that came over me was one of all knowledge. And then finally, this huge wave came over me of just pure love. And I knew that all of this was being one with spirit. I was part of the oneness of spirit and the afterlife with my brother. And I knew that I was home. That was what I felt and what I thought in my mind, my consciousness, that I was home. And I did not want to go back to my life on earth. And so as I'm experiencing all of this wonderment, and knowing that nothing in the entire universe is separate from each other, that everything in the universe, all of us, we are all part of this universal love, this spirit energy. And it was just so amazing. And I just did not want to return to my body. And so after I'd been there for just a bit, and I started thinking like that, it's like I wanted to go on. I didn't want to go back. And so I started in my consciousness feeling, I want to go on. Again, my brother was right there with me. Well, when I started thinking about that, then I began to start whooshing away really rapidly. I could hear this whooshing. And I knew that I was, trying to go on to, I'll say, the next level, because I knew there was a lot more than just what I was experiencing there. But as I started to do that, my brother exerted his energy on me, I'll say, and he said, no, you can't go yet. It's not your time. And when that happened, he just started, it was just like I was being pushed back down. I could see myself coming back into the truck. And then that was when I came back into my body. And at that time, I realized that I had already made a turn onto the road that took me directly to my grandparents. But to this day, I have no idea how I was driving the truck and making a turn, because I have absolutely no recollection at all of doing that. I was infinity with my brother. And for the rest of that day, I went on to my grandparents, but I didn't tell them anything about what had just happened to me, because quite honestly, I believe that for the rest of that day, I was in like this glow from having been in eternity and in this consciousness of one with everything. So I just had kind of this warm, rosy glow. I knew everything was okay with my brother. I was just feeling so peaceful. And quite frankly, I just didn't feel any initiative or need to tell anybody anything about it. And so this continued on for the rest of that day, this being in that state. But it was interesting because when I was at my grandparents', I could see how my brother viewed us in terms of being in this deep grief, because that's how I looked at my grandparents. They were grieving so deeply for my brother, but I'm looking at them from a different perspective that day of what I've just experienced. And I know he's okay. You know, I loved where I had been, but I just couldn't tell them all that. I just didn't have words. But it was very interesting to me, the view that I saw as though it were through my brother's eyes. You know, they don't want us to be that way, but it's only natural, being human, that we do feel that way. But, you know, once I got through that day, however, it was like I fell back into this grief for my brother, because, you know, the reality was, for me, living my life every day, I was never going to get to be with my brother in person, in human form, here on earth anymore, and share all these funny moments and great times that we had, and stay in touch. And so all of that just kind of came back down on me, you know, the next day. But, you know, I knew that he was around. And, you know, once I got back home, I began to have additional outreach from my brother in my house. For example, Donnie's best friend had given to all of us probably the very last photograph that was taken of him, which was like during the last week of his life. He and his best friend they'd done some work for the friend's grandparents on their fireplace. And so anyway, they took a picture with them having finished that. And so his best friend had copies of that photo made for our entire family, which I always keep it on display in my bookcase where I can see it. But after I got home, I would find that picture so many times would be turned down. And I tried many times to walk past it and make it fall down on its own. But I began to understand that was his way of reaching out to let me know he was around me still. And I had all kinds of outreach from him through the years following that. For example, I mean, one day at my house, this is the only other time I actually saw him. But when I walked out of my bedroom and I glanced into the living room, I saw him standing at our stereo cabinet. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking inside the stereo cabinet. He had stayed with us one summer when he was finishing college. He was working that summer in Houston. And he used to, you know, come to our house after work, and he'd usually play something on the stereo there. But there were many other, besides seeing him in the living room, I would come home and I would find the dining room chair, this one chair that he used to sit in. I can't tell you, there were like at least 3 times a week I would come home and find that chair pulled out. And I asked my husband at one point, I said, "Are you coming into the dining room and doing something here?" We hardly ever went to the dining room.
Yeah.
And he said, "No." I told him about this chair being moved out. And that actually continued for, until we sold that house every week. Another time I came home from work and I was getting ready to walk down the hall to our bedroom, and this book was on the other side of the hallway. And we had this bookcase that went all the way down to the carpet. And so this book had come out of the very bottommost shelf, which was at carpet level. And so it was all the way across the hallway to the other side. It hit the other wall, and that's where it was. So I knew that it had flown out of there. There was no other way for it to be there. And another time, my husband and I were in our TV room. We've been watching TV in there. We had a big bookcase in there, and the topmost shelf, we kept a bunch of videos from vacations and even some from when Donnie had stayed there with us. And we're watching TV, and all of a sudden, from the very topmost shelf where these videos were, this video flew halfway across the room to where we were sitting and landed at our feet.
Gosh.
My husband and I both looked at each other like, what just happened here? But, these are the kinds of things the kinds of ways he has continued to try to, let us know that he's around. And again, there's many other things that have happened, but, people have asked me, so do you think your brother is an earthbound ghost? And I tell them, absolutely not. He is fully on the other side, but he has the ability and the energy to reach out to us. And, anyone who crosses over, I think that they have those abilities. I think it just depends on their situation, their families, their, whatever, as to whether or not these things like that can occur. And the other thing too is a lot of people, they may not even notice things like that happening and give any credence to it. I'll say that perhaps this could be outreach by, from someone who's crossed over. But for me, not only did I have things happening in the house and other types of experiences, but I also developed this, because I'd had this out of body experience and my whole consciousness was changed. My energy field, I think, changed because I began to notice too, at night when I would drive along the freeway, lights would go out as I drove past them. Then you could see them come back on as I went past. The same thing happens if I go walking in the evening along a roadway. The street lamps will go out as I walk past. And so that still happened. But again, I think it was a question of, I just had such an energy change and such a huge change in consciousness, because when I came back from that experience, and once I got more beyond so much of the heavy grief, I realized that my view of life and my understanding of things was totally different. And I had grown up, we went to church. I was a Baptist, and when I came back from my experience, my understanding of so many things in the universe and about life itself were different than just things I had been taught. It was like I had this innate understanding from having been this oneness with spirit and the universe. It was completely consciousness changing. So just so many incidents in my life like that. And eventually, I went years and years leading my life, had my career, but I hardly ever talked about these things that had happened to me. I had just maybe one or two of my friends that I did share some of these happenings with, and they were just in awe. They were amazed at some of the things that I had seen and had happened. But this was not something that was part of my life that I just talked about with people. That just didn't happen. And even though I continued to grow in my understanding, and one of the things that happened to me was I was compelled to read all these books on spirituality when I came back from my experience. And I used to read lots and lots of books anyway, because I was an English major in college. But once I came back from this experience, all I wanted to read about and fully connect with was information on the universe, higher consciousness, spirituality. I've read hundreds and hundreds of books like that through the years. And again, having been an English major, I used to read all kinds of fictional books. I had no desire to read any more fiction when I came back from that experience. So again, just another example of the kind of changes in my consciousness that I had. But so after all these years of not really talking about this and not sharing it, I retired in 2016. And 3 months after that, suddenly I decided that I was going to sit down and write my story. I was going to write a book. Because I wanted to share this experience with the world and help people. And it took me about 8 or 9 months to finish it and get it published. It came out the following September. And I didn't know what to expect. How were people going to react to this? But I didn't really care so much. I was just interested to know what people might have to say. All these friends, all these people in Houston I know who, business people, because I just, I put it out there that I'd written this book, and a lot of my friends read it. And I was so happy with the result that I had in terms of people were just so interested in it. And for the first time in my life, since my experience in 1983, I experienced true authenticity in my life, because suddenly I was claiming this other side of me that I never talked about, except to maybe these few friends. That was just not something I talked about. This whole experience I had with my brother, all these things that had happened, and all these after effects that I personally had. And I just was so free when this came out and people started talking with me about my experiences. I just can't even tell you the difference it made in how I felt. And then my passion became speaking to people about this and helping people who have lost others. And that's what I have proceeded in the years since I published the story, the book. And it's my passion to do that, because people need to understand, it's okay to go through all this grief. It's what we do as humans. And the deeper the grief, the deeper your love was for someone in your life. But I wanted to share all these things that have happened, because they need to understand that, people who have passed on, they can still be around us at times. And, we're going to see them again. And we're going to cross over just as they have. And so it's a time when we lose people. Yes, we may experience deep grief, but we can learn a lot about ourselves being on the other side of that grief. And the other thing that I want to make people aware of by having written this book was to look around, be attentive to signs that might be there from your loved ones, trying to reach out to you in simple ways that, you just might not even think of. But it's important, and it's important to understand that our loved ones are right here. They're just in a different dimension. They're just at a different frequency and vibration than we are. And they have a fuller, deeper consciousness with the oneness of the universe. And I have absolutely no fear of death. It is much harder to live life here and get through, some of the traumatic things that can happen to us while we're here. The idea of dying and suffering is more scary to me than crossing over, because on the other side, with your oneness of consciousness, there's just so much more to understand and experience. And that is my message to people when I'm talking and speaking to people. The other thing I would add to, just one other note, is as time progresses, it's like I get new after effects, I'll call it. I think perhaps it's just my consciousness continuing to open to more energy, higher energy and frequency. But now, sometimes when I start speaking to people in person or even on the phone, they will suddenly share with me that they lost someone who they loved, and they'll, express to me some of their grief or whatever. And I'm finding that sometimes this person they're speaking to me about, who has crossed over already, sometimes they show up right here by me. I've seen their faces right here by me. And they will have messages for this person who's speaking to me that they want me to pass on, which I do. And a lot of times that happens when the person is talking to me. They have some kind of angst about something they think they didn't do enough of for that person who was dying. They have some kind of, they feel like they should have done more, that kind of feeling. And then their loved one will show up and they'll have these messages for this person to not feel that way. And so it brings comfort to them. So that's a really new effect, I'll say, for me, that just started happening probably in the last year and a half. So that's been very interesting. I didn't expect that to happen.
What a incredible experiences. Thank you firstly for sharing all of that. What a wonderful ambassador you are for Afterlife. And I'd love to ask you a few questions about your journey. But as you were talking about coming out, I completely understand it. But I had this image of your brother, and he was so proud of you.
Well, I'm glad to know that.
Really proud of you. It brings tears to my eyes. It was a beautiful image.
Oh, great.
Yes. I'd like to go back to when you were driving in the car with your OBE or out-of-body experience. And you went to the universe, and many people who have, this wasn't a near-death experience, your physical body wasn't sick or dying, you lose track of time. There really is no time in the other realms. You can call it what you will. Were you able, when you were up in the universe, up in the different realm, and I also feel in some way it was a gift to you from your brother in some capacity, were you able to look down and see your physical body?
Only when I started back down, I'll say, when he exerted energy on me and said, no, you can't go. And he was, felt like he was pushing me down really rapidly. And when that started happening, as I got close to, being back on Earth and close to the vehicle, it was like I could see through the roof of the vehicle. And I just went right through the roof into the vehicle, like back to driving. So I'm sure, obviously, I was still physically in there, but it was like, obviously, my, I don't know if you call it my soul, but, my being came back.
Higher consciousness. There's many names for it.
Yes, exactly. It's hard to describe. I was obviously still in the truck and doing the driving, but I was not consciously affiliated with that when I was out of my body with him.
Very interesting. And you talk about the oneness, and again, this wasn't a near-death experience, it was an out-of-body experience, the oneness. And I've interviewed many people who have had a near-death experience, and they talk, the commonality is this unconditional feeling of love. Would that also be similar to what you experience when you use the term oneness?
Absolutely. The biggest feeling that I experienced on the other side, after I had this wave of peace and then all knowledge, like I knew everything in the universe that had ever happened. I knew everything. And then it was as though then this third wave that was love, it was this energy of love, and it's what we call spirit or God. We have many names for that. But I felt the aliveness of that, of spirit, and the love that was and is everything. That oneness with spirit, if you can, get back to that oneness is with love. And that's what everything in the universe is, because that is what spirit is. And, you just don't want to leave it. But it is all about the love. Many times that's what I say to people. It's just really all about the love, because that's what spirit is. That's what we are all made of. No matter what we act out like in our physical lives, you can look at people and say, oh, that person killed somebody, they're evil, whatever. And so there are obstacles, there's energies that block some things in people. But underneath all of that, who we are, everybody is, everything in the universe. We are love. We are love. That is what we are. We are one with spirit. That is what spirit, that's what God is. That's whatever name you give it. That's what everything is. And if we could only, get our heads wrapped around that while we're here in this life, it's even having experienced this, I like everyone else, I have moments of sadness or anger or whatever, and it's still all about the love.
And it is hard often, these incredible multi-dimensional, multi-universal experiences to put into words. So you're doing a good job of it. And you talk about all knowledge. I'm interested, did you have the feeling that all our humanness, all the humans are interconnected in some capacity?
Absolutely. We are all connected. And this knowledge that I had was virtually, I just felt like I was not only one with it, but I knew everything that had ever happened, everything. And I think that is because the consciousness is just so open, and you're able to just directly absorb that.
And when you say everything that has ever happened, I guess I've got two parts to this question. Was it everything that had happened for you as a soul, firstly, or was it everything that had happened for the collective consciousness of the earth, of the universe?
In the collective consciousness, that's what it was.
And also you say everything that has happened, does that include past and future?
I believe that it does, yes. I mean,
it's such an interesting concept, isn't it?
It is, and it's very hard to explain that feeling of just being, it's like being spirit. I mean, that's the only way I know how to say it. You're just not a physical entity experiencing it. It's just like your spirit, your consciousness. That's what you are as part, and that's what I think that I was out there in the universe, my just consciousness and that oneness.
Very interesting. And everything that has happened or is ever going to happen is already is in some capacity. You mentioned that when you came back from your out-of-body experience, you were in a euphoric state for that day, but after the day after, you slipped back into your sorrow. In some way, did this experience that you had alleviate your sorrow?
Well, I won't say that it alleviated it. Because quite frankly, for a very long time, I went through a lot of grief. Even though I had had this experience, this wonderful experience with my brother. But, the human side of me that just missed my brother so much, I in the day-to-day living, I just struggled with that because we had always been so close. So that human side of me, the missing him and all the interactions we always had, that is what I struggled with. Now, I've read a lot of books and lots of people's stories, and some people are able, it seems through what they write, it seems that they've been able to just kind of make an about face, and they're just really suddenly okay about that person's passing. But for me personally, it wasn't that way for me. While I understood and marveled at what I had experienced and knew that my brother was still around and still alive, but that human side of me, I'm a very extroverted person, and I'm all about getting together with people and being with them, and I couldn't deal with him not being there anymore.
I get that. We have chosen to come to this earth in our physical body, and one of those experiences of the kisses and the hugs and the touch of other humans and those human experiences. So I completely understand that. And obviously grief and sorrow has no time frame. For those that are experiencing, quite profoundly, does it get easier? Maybe that's not even the right terminology. Does it alleviate? Does the suffering dissipate?
Well, yes, I mean, it does eventually. In fact, in my book, I talk about that. My deal was, and of course, I was working at the time too, but I used to go out after work a lot for happy hours with friends, and just, I would drink an inordinate amount of booze. I just wanted to be numb from thinking about it, from just the rawness of what my life was like now without my brother. And, there were many times that on weekends and things I was hungover. I just wanted to numb myself. But eventually I got really tired of having hangovers. At some juncture down the road, it took a couple of years, but I finally woke up to the fact that I said, my brother is not here anymore, but I am still here. And I just can't go on living like this. And I had to really make a conscious decision to pull myself out of that and really start living my life again with this new reality that was part of our family. And after that, I began to make progress out of it and began to, move forward out of that deep grief place I had been for quite a while. And then it was easier for me to think back on this experience that I had had with him and go back to that many times through the rest of my life to remember that. But, I've read books where, like I said, some of these people, whatever experience they have, it's like they're catapulted into another space of being okay with everything and joyful. But it was not like that for me. And I know that there are probably a lot of people who it just takes them a long time to get over a certain person or something that they've lost. And, again, writing my book and talking with people, I want them to understand that even though I had this experience, in no way, shape, or form did I just suddenly the next morning wake up and I was happy-go-lucky and like, wow, I had this great experience. I know all this stuff. Look what happened to me. It just wasn't like that.
Yeah.
And that's okay. You just have to live through it on your own terms. Or you can get help from a grief counselor. Like I said, sometimes that can help. But I just wasn't one of those people who could just suddenly let go of all the grief and the change that had happened.
And everyone's individual and has the way they deal with grief and suffering and all experiences, including joy, they need to experience in their own time, or there is no time frame. For those people that would love dearly in some way to receive messages or connect with a loved one, or have a loved one connect with them, do you have any tips or advice?
Well, number one, I would emphasize to people, again, as I said earlier, look around, see if you notice anything being different, happening around your house or something like that, as maybe a clue that they're trying to just give you a little message. But it's just that you have to move forward in your life at your own pace. And I think that if you need to cry, if you need to feel badly, you just need to experience that. And when you have gotten to the point in your consciousness where it's like, well, I've done this enough. I still am here. I need to move forward. It's just a process, and you have to really forgive yourself for that. It's just, that's the way it is. And the advice I have is just be okay with yourself wherever you are in the process. Don't try to force things on yourself or let others force things on you. But the other thing too is reading some of these books and other people's experiences even I think can really help people too. It's why there's such a wave now of so many people doing that. They want to share with the world whatever it is they experienced and however they experienced it. If they had their own near-death experience and they were on the other side, or if they had a loved one come through to them, or whatever. People want to share these experiences. And the reason they want to do that is because they want to help other people who may end up in that kind of situation. They want to help them realize, hey, you're not alone. I went through something similar. If someone gets a particular book or reads a particular story, that can prove helpful to them. Because you know what, in the end, for me, writing the book, I mean, not only was it about sharing that side of me and making myself become a whole person, but it's also really about helping other people who are in grief about others, or people they've lost, and to understand maybe this was just a glimpse into the other side for them. But I have had continued outreach from my brother all these years, and I think that should be compelling for people.
Yes, and be open to the possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like I'm a crazy person, and I certainly
You are not a crazy person.
I didn't want to talk to people about it at the time, but I didn't think I was crazy. I just accepted that he was around and he was able to do this. That's the other part too. The human side of us, we're used to being finite in how we look at who we are versus, these people who have crossed over. This is the infinite, and this is, consciousness and miraculous things that we as humans, surrounded by this physical body, that we just a lot of times can't wrap our heads around that. And so I wanted to help people understand that, what we consider really weird and out there experiences can totally happen with someone who's crossed over. That's another whole way of being that is not like it is here. And if you can be open to that and accept it, then your life, I think, is fuller for that.
Yes, and what you said before, a big congratulations to coming out. As you mentioned, I often find when we surrender or we're completely vulnerable, wonderful things do happen. I always say, when I first started this interview series, I was really worried that people would think I'm weird. Now I don't even care about it, and it's liberating and it's freeing. But to push aside, the social constraints of what is weird and what is acceptable, a big congratulations. And speaking your truth really is absolute freedom, in my opinion.
Yes.
And it was so your book was so well received, and the people that didn't receive it, well, you weren't relying on other people's reactions for your own freedom, and that's real freedom.
And that's true. It's true. I wasn't really relying on other people's. It's like, this is my story. I'm just telling you my story. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I'm just sharing what happened to me. And that's always where I come from to people. And I think that's very helpful, because I can't tell you how many people open up to me about things that have happened to them and what they feel about their grief, and how I had this, for example, I went back to my hometown about a year and a half after the book came out. I had a big book signing, and it was also in conjunction with a high school reunion and stuff. And so one of the guys I knew from high school, he came over to me. He had read my book, and he said, I just want to let you know how much your book helped me. He said, I just lost my brother not very long ago. And he said, your book really helped me.
Oh.
And you know what? That's what it's all about. If I touch someone like that, then for me, that's the reason, I shared it. And that's why I speak to people, because of that.
Oh, you're not going to make me cry now. I always cry with the guests.
It was a very touching moment, and I felt his pain, I guess, when he said that to me, because you could tell that his brother had not been gone for very long. And so, I psychically pick up on things like that. You know, Having had this out of body experience into infinity, like I did develop a lot of after effects, as I mentioned. And, there are a lot of things that I intuit and know and am just psychic about. That's not everything, but when it comes to people and their losses, I do feel information from them.
That's great. I'd also just like to, do you want to hold up the book, please, for everyone that's watching?
Oh.
And for anyone that's listening or watching, all Paula's details and the book will be in the show notes.
Here's the book cover.
Driving into Infinity.
Living with My Brother's Spirit. And there is on the back cover, of course this is the hardback, but there is a picture of him. Can you see?
No, you might have to put it in front of your face. Yes, up a bit higher. Great. Yeah.
That's so weird. There he is.
Thank you for that. I'd also just briefly like to ask you, it's sometimes people are unsure what to say to people who've lost loved ones. What's the best way from your experiences, how to be comforted if you're in that particular place of despair and sorrow? People are uncomfortable. I don't know whether to say, I'm sorry, or bring you some food. What's the best thing to do?
Well, it's just comforting for people to hug you or tell you, I'm really sorry for your loss, and we love you and care about you, and maybe say something about that person, well, he was a great guy or whatever. But you have to understand that when people are just in deep grief, there's just not a lot that's going to be like this big comfort for them. Again, I think probably I had just an extreme deep grief experience from my brother's death. When older people die, it's different. Of course, like my grandfather died, I was really close to him. And of course, I was sorrowful, but it was not the extent to which this, I experienced this loss of my brother. Mm-hmm. And, the thing of it is, I especially feel badly for people who lose those in sudden accidents. And because that is just like what happened in my life. One day they're there, and then suddenly this whole thing that you have no idea is going to happen happens, and they're completely gone. And the one thing that bothered me the most about going through my brother's funeral and sitting there was hearing hearing the words that my brother was just sleeping. And, especially after I had my experience with him, I mean, it's like, no, he's not sleeping. He's alive. He's on the other side. Probably that terminology I heard was the worst. Because it's like, no, he's not just dead and gone and sleeping, and it's just a
non-consciousness.
And then I had my experience, and then I had, proof positive, but I was never going to believe that. And I think it's just a question of being warm-hearted to someone, and, maybe giving them a hug, or if you're not that kind of person to hug people, just say, we'll be thinking about you and your family, or something like that. Mm-hmm. Just expressions like that. It was helpful to me that people said that to me.
Thank you for sharing that. I've asked all the questions. Is there something else you'd like to discuss with the Passion Harvest audience today?
just, you know, I would just say that now that I'm later in years and, I've been experiencing all these things, I still have moments when I really, really miss my brother or the physical side here in life, to be with him here. I think that anybody who loses someone they love is at some point in their life always going to feel that. And that's okay. It doesn't, I mean, I even, every once in a while, I'll think about him and something I really liked to do with him, and I will cry a little bit. But it's only for myself at that moment, just feeling that loss of what could have been with him. But you know what? It's okay. You just have to get through that and go on. And it's just don't be hard on yourself. And again, some people, they're able to just come on out of it, and those moments may never strike them like that, but everybody is different. And I just say to people, it's okay. It's okay. Whatever you're going to feel along the way, it's okay. And you'll come out of it on the other side, and you'll finish living out your life, and then you'll be there with them. Yeah. And it'll all be just wonderful. None of us are going to live forever.
No, we're all going to die in our physical body at some stage. That we know for certain.
Exactly. And so I have to remind myself of that along the way as well. But I just think you have to be gentle with yourself as life goes on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Paula Lenz, you're an inspiration and a wonderful ambassador for Afterlife, and such a beautiful lady. And I've had such a insightful and inspiring talk with you. And thank you so much for being on Passion Harvest.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I was very excited to get your email about that.
I was very excited to get your reply.
Well, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your life.
Oh, you too. I'm sure we'll be in touch before then, though.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Paula.
Thank you.
Bye for now. If you like this episode, please do subscribe for weekly, passionate, inspirational interviews.